KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3 FM.
This edition of the Let's Dine Out Show. Food critic Allan Borgen here.
And Izzy Bussy.
And we're
I'm still trying to get over.
We were all ready
the
to go.
Sasquatch.
And we have Bigfoot. We heard of it. Some lady saw Bigfoot, took videos of it, and heard it crying for
in her backyard.
In her backyard, of
in
course.
Ohio.
In Ohio. Oh, that's her.
That's
Yeah.
it.
That's her. Yeah. Well, it's not. At least it's not Texas and Florida. That's where usually funny things are. So, oh my. Well, that should be interesting.
Boy.
Yep. Anyway, welcome to another great show today, and it's a little hot out here. It's about 98, almost 100 degrees, and we just got back from Texas. Did a little eating tour of Texas, and airfares were. They say it's really bad. It wasn't that bad. We only had about 5-6 cancellations. We had 2 delays. We were supposed to be home one day. We got home 3 days later. Other than that, it was fine. I mean,
don't have any plans. Just don't have any plans on your calendar because you never know when you're gonna get on that plane.
All I'm gonna say is if you are gonna go, we were very, we felt safe and everything in terms of COVID and all that stuff. But just be prepared and bring extra vitamins, extra pills. Like luckily we did, and things happen. So hopefully you'll get better. But the flight attendants are having the same problems we are, not feeling angry and everything.
Well, it's not their fault,
No.
It's like they have nothing to do with, what's going on with the scheduling and what's happening with the resources, and stuff like that. So they showed up, obviously, right?
Yep.
So don't let it out on them. So
one that's after another. So
yep.
Anyway, before we introduce you to a wonderful guest, this is a gentleman who I've met about 6, 7, 8 years ago. I can't remember exactly when, but I did meet him, and he's considered one of America's most respected baking educators in the United States. And we're going to get his name is Peter Reinhardt. We'll be getting right into him. But I want to talk. We have a couple commercials here. I want to get out of the way so we can get to Peter. And one I want to talk about is Bowler and Bowler Family Law. If you have any kind of problems, including divorces or any kind of family law practices that need help, Bowler and Bowler in Redlands is definitely the place to go to. They've been in business for over 50 years. And they deal with everything from spousal support issues, same-sex marriages, child support, non-marital relationships, paternity issues, stuff like that, and, of course, divorces. And what's nice is they talk to you, not down to you. They do care. They take their time and talk to you about it. And their staff are wonderful. Every time they call, they need something, they'll get the answer for you. So I really, really highly recommend them. They're really, really good. It's Bowler and Bowler Family Law. That's BOWLER. And Bowler, ANDBowler.com. That's bowlerandbowler.com. They're in Redlands, and their number is 909-335-4848. That's 909-335-4848. And another great sponsor we have is called Soaring Swine Acres. Now, this is one that I'm very familiar with because I eat all their stuff. They make over 350 small quantities of incredible jellies, jams, very unique honey, sauces, pickled products, and their new Voodoo Queen holistic teas that you can't find anywhere else. What's nice about that, they're always reinventing things, everything. There's no preservatives, and it's all small batches. So it's really, really fantastic. And best of all, they give you free samples. So tell them Allan sent you. Maybe they'll give you more samples than most. So they won't kick you out. Let's put it that way. But they're located in Yucaipa on California Street. If you go around that little curve area, it goes to the right. It's right there. Or you can go on the website. It's Soaring, SOARING, Swine, SWINE, Acres, ACRES.com. That's SoaringSwineAcres.com. And I guarantee you're going to like this, whether it's for a gift or just for your own taste buds and want to make yourself happy. That's the main thing. So anyway, SoaringSwineAcres.com.
Well, our last sponsor that we have is Ray Shanghai Bistro. They are located next to Redlands DMV on Lagonia in Redlands. Ray Shanghai Bistro offers the largest, most delicious array of traditional and original Chinese dishes available in the Inland Empire. Some of my favorite dishes are the house-made pot stickers, crisp pork spare ribs with garlic, their unique spicy lamb with bamboo, or the one spicy lamb with the toothpicks, the sweet and tangy deep-fried orange peel beef.
That's my favorite. So good.
And you like the hot and sour soup
Oh,
there.
that's my favorite there.
Mhm.
It's got a little kick to it, which most of them don't have that.
Mhm.
But it's a really, really nice flavor, and it stays with you a little bit. I
Yeah,
like
and
it.
it's not really like I think some of them are a little thicker, and
Yeah,
theirs
no.
is just perfect.
It's perfect.
Yeah, and the savory basil, spicy shrimp, plus lots of vegetarian dishes. Whether you dine in or pick up the food, or have them cater your next party or special occasion, you'll see why Ray's, spelled RUI''S, Shanghai Bistro is truly the best Chinese restaurant in the Inland
For
Empire.
sure.
Their website is Ray, RUIS, Shanghai, SHANGHAI, Bistro, BISTRO.net. It's Ray'sShanghaiBistro.net. That's
Good.
Ray'sShanghaiBistro.net.
Good food, good jellies, and if you're going through a
Happy
divorce,
eating.
good lawyers. So,
Yeah.
okay, speaking of happy, this is a gentleman who I met, I would say about 7 years ago. It's been a while, but his name is always coming up, whether it's on the news or with the Pizza Expo. He's considered to be one of the most respected baking educators in America. He's written, I want to say 6, 7, 8 cookbooks. 4 of them, I believe, have been awarded or nominated for a James Beard Award, with 3 of them winning, including a Book of the Year in 2002 for The Bread Baker's Apprentice. This guy really knows his stuff, and he's also doing now pizzas. So if you're any kind of baking, this is a gentleman you want to hear. So, Peter, welcome to the Let's Dine Out show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you guys.
I've got your little resume here. It's about 15 pages long, so I think I'll let you do a little more. But I guess my first question is, why baking? How was it that baking became part of your life?
By accident, like a lot of people who've gotten into like the food side of the world. You know, some people, they know when they're from the time they're kids that I'm going to be a chef someday, or I'm going to be I'm going to have my own food show or this or that. But that wasn't my trajectory. I was actually, during my college years, I was the film major, broadcasting and film major. My goal was to one day, like write and direct movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a chance to get it. I had an opportunity to get a job in films, but I was at the end of my college, period, and I realized as this sort of opportunity came that I wasn't really ready for that, because I knew that I had skills to possibly be a writer or a director, but I didn't really know what I had to say. I didn't know who I was, and I felt like I needed to find out, who am I, and what do I have to say that would qualify me to have something to write about.
Right.
And so I went off in kind of like a journey of what I just call now sort of my journey of self-discovery, and I call it maybe a spiritual journey, and somehow fell in with a group of, we're talking about 50 years ago, a group of hippies in Boston, Massachusetts, who were getting ready to open a vegetarian organic restaurant.
Wow.
And they were just sort of gathering other people who were similar to them, essentially a bunch of seekers who, it was that era. We're talking about the 1960s, the 1970s. It was the hippie era.
Right.
And so I didn't know how to cook, but I liked food, and so I kind of started hanging out with them. And while I was there, I discovered a passion and love for food. And within a short time, I had figured out how to cook all the dishes that the founders of the group were introducing. And these were, nowadays vegetarian food is pretty common, but back then the concept of organic and vegetarian
Very
was
different.
very new.
Yeah.
And in Boston, there was really one other restaurant maybe in the whole city besides us. So within a while, we became a destination restaurant for people that were looking for some alternative life. And in the course of it, I kind of started to find my way. And eventually, I was drawn more and more to a spiritual life, exploring with, this is the year of gurus and yogis and all sorts of spiritual masters, coming through. Our restaurant, being an alternative place, drew a lot of them. And before we knew it, we were like meeting people of all these different spiritual paths, and some of the famous yogis, the Ram Dasses and the Yogi Bhajans and all that. These people who were big figures back then, their followers and even they themselves would come up to our restaurant and hang out with us.
Wow, that's neat.
And so I thought, okay, I'm going to get into yoga. That's what I'll do. Maybe I'll be a yoga teacher. And so I spent a year or two like really going deep into the Eastern religions, and I still wasn't finding, it wasn't scratching that itch that I felt like I, wasn't there yet. And unexpectedly, I ran into some people who were Christian. And I was raised Jewish, and it was the last place I would even consider looking. But as I got deeper into it, I started I responded to it. It awakened something within me. And soon I was getting deeper into Bible study and this and that. And over time, I realized that this was my calling, and I joined this Christian community of it was essentially a new hybrid of conventional traditional Christianity, but also it brought in Eastern religion philosophies and things like that. Suddenly it was this new thing, and I was on fire with it, and I ended up becoming a member of this community, and went from being Peter to Brother Peter, and meanwhile I had also developed some cooking skills. So this is all part of. I'm kind of leading up to how I ended up doing what I'm doing now with bread. Is that while I was living in this community and while I was Brother Peter, I often found myself in the kitchen cooking because I had cooking skills. And eventually I ended up in San Francisco at our headquarters, and San Francisco is and was even then the bread center of the United States. That's where sourdough, was really, happening. And
right.
You didn't have to make bread because every store out of your corner had, pretty good sourdough bread.
Mm-hmm.
But for the fun of it, one day I just decided to make my own. I said, this bread is here. And so I dove in, and the first bread I ever made was Julia Child's French bread, her baguette recipe, from not her big famous French bread, series, but from one of her other books. There's
Mm-hmm.
like 6 pages of instructions.
Wow.
And a friend of mine said, look, if you're going to make this, make sure you follow every step. Don't skip. And the key to this bread that made it so good was that it had an extra rise. It was a long, slow-rising bread. You punched it down an extra time, and then finally you shaped it. And I made bread one night while I was cooking for this seminary of people who were in training for ministry, and I put the bread out for dinner, and they totally flipped out over it. They kept coming back to the kitchen and saying, you got to keep making that bread. That bread's amazing. I've never had bread like that. And
that was it.
And so the next night was it. But the next night I made it again, and this time I did something. I think this time after I shaped it, I lost track of time, and I overproofed it.
Uh-huh.
And the bread kind of rose, and then it fell, and it was close to dinner time, and I didn't have any choice, so I baked it anyway. I said, what am I going to do? So I threw it in the oven, and it came out. It was very wrinkly and didn't look beautiful like the first night's loaves. But after I sliced it up and put it in the bread basket, nobody knew. They thought that was all part of an intentional design that I put into the bread, because when they tasted it, they liked it even more. They came back and that's even better than last night. Just keep doing it. Well, that was the beginning. And so, as from that, I became a sort of a bread hobbyist. I started making bread even when I wasn't, working in the kitchen. And eventually, I met one of the other members of our community, because we have had families and married couples, and as well as people who live monastic lives in our community. And she was also a very good cook, Susan, who was known at the time as Sister Susan. And we ended up getting married, and we both had some cooking skills, and so we opened a restaurant. And by then, I had developed some other breads that I just was doing it for fun. I really didn't think much of it as a career. But one of the breads I came up with was called Struan, a multi-grain harvest bread that was unique and wonderful, maybe still even 50 years later, my most favorite bread.
Wow.
And we started making that bread and the French bread and a couple of other breads as part of our restaurant that we opened. Because we had cooking skills, we opened a little cafe restaurant as a ministry, and bread was just part of it. And
right.
We were showcasing other things. Anyway, the bread just took off and had a life of its own. And before we knew it, within 3 years, we were making not only bread for ourselves, but then other restaurants wanted it. Distributors were coming, and they wanted us to make it. So we built the bakery.
That's so neat.
Again, unexpectedly, I'm going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole of bread. And I said, you know what? I think I finally know what I'm going to write about. And I wrote my first book, and it was called, the name of our bakery was called Brother Juniper's. So the book was called Brother Juniper's Bread Book, Slow Rise as Method and Metaphor. And what I realized was that bread was the perfect metaphor for sort of a new way of looking at life.
Right.
And that was what I. So really, I was making bread because it gave me an excuse to write.
Right.
And writing kept, kind of like I had to keep going back and doing more bread. And by the time we kind of ran our string at the restaurant and bakery and sold it, because really I wasn't cut out to run a bakery and restaurant operation. We grew it to about 2,000 loaves a day, but it was not really what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I wanted to write and teach. So we sold it, and by then, I'd written a couple of books. By then, and people kept asking me questions like, what is it about bread that's so special? Why do people respond to bread in such a deep way? And that's what I really had to write about was to get to the bottom of what is it about bread. You needed to answer the question, what is it about bread that makes it so unique and special? And in order to do that, I had to become an expert in bread.
So you did.
And now we're into when it started, it was the 1980s, and then suddenly we're in the 1990s. And as some of you may remember, some of your listeners might remember, that was when the whole artisan bread movement kind of started happening nationally. And I found myself right in the middle of it as a writer and also as somebody who's baking bread. And so before long, I started teaching bread making. And I ended up at first the California Culinary Academy. I taught a little bit at the Culinary Institute of America, and then eventually ended up at Johnson & Wales University on the East Coast, which at the time, I was living in the West Coast, but we moved back east because our family lived here. And I got this great job at Johnson & Wales University, which is the largest culinary school in the world. And I started teaching bread there and kept writing books. And now I'm like into my 14th book. And
14 books. Oh.
Yeah. But there were times when I'm going, I think I've run out of things to say about bread, but what else, can I write about that I love? Because you really should write about things you love. And one thing I really love is pizza. And pizza is really just kind of a variation of bread. It's just bread with something on it. So I dove into the same kind of exploration of what is it about pizza that makes it the most popular food in the world. And that's how you and I met.
Right.
Because we were judging a pizza contest together at the Pizza Expo.
Right.
I think in probably in Las Vegas,
right?
And before long, the whole pizza world opened up to me, and so that gave me some other things to write about. And
now,
that's where we're at.
In 2002, you went on a 2-year pizza quest, trekking through America and Italy, looking for the perfect pie, which he chronicled in his book American Pie: The Search for the Perfect Pizza. What was that like? Because that's a lot of pizzas, and how did you not gain 6,000 pounds or become diabetic overnight?
Well, I kind of did gain a little too much weight, I'm sure, and I'm still struggling with that, and I'm fighting it.
Yeah.
But the thing is that I really didn't go. There are people that are much more obsessive about going after pizza. They're on their own quest, and they've gone to hundreds and hundreds of pizza restaurants everywhere, and they've eaten more pizza than I have because I've met them, along the way. But what I did was I kind of knew what great pizza could taste like. The purpose of the book was really to answer the question, what is the difference between good pizza and great pizza?
Right.
And at that time, and we're talking about the early 2000s now, so it's almost exactly 20 years ago, there were always hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pizza restaurants, and all of them were making good pizza. It's almost impossible to screw up pizza if you're working with dough and cheese and sauce. But there were a few pizzerias, at least here in my experience in the United States, a few pizzerias that had broken from the pack, that were doing something that separated them from all these good pizzerias, and they had become destination pizzerias. And one of those was in Phoenix, Arizona, called Pizzeria Bianco, which at the time was still somewhat of a secret. The only people who knew about it were sort of the people who lived in Phoenix and also, sort of culinary experts, chefs, and people. Nancy Silverton, for instance, from LA, she knew about Pizzeria Bianco. In fact, it was very inspirational for her in her work later in opening Pizzeria Mozza, which is one of the great pizzerias of the world right now. But there weren't that many like that. There were the old guard great pizzerias of New York and New Haven, which are kind of pizza meccas. Chicago has some great pizzas, but there were only a few that you would consider, sort of by great, I mean memorable. Memorable was the key word here. Is what made, and so the book had to answer the question: what is it that makes them memorable? So I didn't have to go to every single pizzeria in the world. Although every time I was on the road somewhere, I'd ask people, where can we get some great pizza? And we ate a lot of good pizza, and every once in a while we stumbled upon great pizza. But then as what happened with the bread revolution in the 90s, the pizza was having its own renaissance as the bread world, as bread got better, it influenced the quality of pizza. And so, starting around 2010 or so, a lot of pizza makers decided they wanted to raise their game and make bread that make pizza that could be considered memorable. And that's when I would say over the last 10 to 12 years, there's been a surge of great pizzerias in America, because either people who were already making pizza or people who were just getting newly into it. The way I stumbled into bread making, maybe they got into it because they just liked it and they were making it for fun. And then someone said, you ought to open your own pizza place, or you ought to get a pizza truck, or do a pop-up. All of a sudden, all this was happening, and the quality of pizza just went to a whole other level.
Right.
And that's given me, again, lots of ammunition for writing more and more about pizza.
Exactly. My co-host is Isabel Bussey. She's with me here. Say hi, Izzy.
Hi, how you doing?
Hey, Izzy.
Good. Now, Izzy, the last 2 years, I believe, went with me to Las Vegas to the International Pizza Expo. And while I was judging, when I wasn't judging, I was tasting everybody else's pizza and bringing it to her in the audience. So, Izzy, I mean, what Peter said was so true. There's some really, most pizzas is good, but some are just like, wow. And I mean, you said that, and very creative stuff coming out there.
Yeah, and not just the toppings. You can taste almost the difference in the dough. I didn't think it's possible, like I was one of those people like, I eat pizzas once in a while, like them, but, wasn't anything to wow about. But then I started tasting the differences of the different doughs. And it was just like, wow. I mean, it really blew my mind, because I was like, oh, my gosh, it's like a science lesson, because it depends where you are, humidity level, what type of flour you're making, how long you let it ferment. I mean, all that has to do something, how you prepare it, how you stretch it. It all has something to do with that dough. Like that's what influenced what it's going to come out as, that texture.
And that was beginning, and then we met, Tony Giovanni, who kind of started this whole revolution, and Derek Sanchez, who's like, he's fanatical on his dough. It's got to be perfect. And once he gets to the perfect one, then he reaches higher even than that. But I mean, his bread was just incredible, and the dough and everything is just.
Well, I think you've really tapped into the key there, because when I was doing the first book, and when I've expanded on this in some of my other pizza books since then, is that people are always asking me, well, what is the key to the difference between good and great pizza? And it always starts with the crust. Great pizza always starts with the crust and the dough, because you can't have a great pizza if you don't have a great crust.
But don't you agree too that the type of ovens they use too? I mean, some of the conveyor belt ovens. I had one restaurant who had a good one. But there's another one in town here that has very creative toppings, but the crust sucks when it runs through the conveyor belt thing. It's simple, it's brainless, you don't have to do anything to it, but it's horrible. It's just horrible. And I really think
there was a phase back in, I would say, sometime around 2001 or 2002, where a lot of chefs started getting into adding pizza to their menu, because Wolfgang Puck did it, at Spago, and Alice Waters did it at Chez Panisse, and so everyone started, let's make pizza, and it's, something we could do easily. Well, it's not so easy if your focus, for most chefs, it was about the toppings. So you could make a creative pizza, you could make clever toppings, delicious toppings, but if they didn't understand that one principle about that it starts with the crust, then the best they could come up with is what I would call an interesting pizza, but not a memorable pizza.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of interesting pizzas being developed, and it was all part of the learning process. But it wasn't until even those chefs, many of them now, are doing great pizzas, because they realized, wait a minute, it's about the crust. It's all about the crust.
Right. And being a judge the last 9 years, it's something that's around the world. And I just read yesterday, Izzy and I were thinking about the show today before we found out we're going to have you on. And the number one worldwide dish that every country literally has their version of is pizza. That's the number one food, which is really, you think about it, I mean, it's incredible. But and now it's even gone to not only restaurants, but now the home invasions of pizza machines. I mean, between Uni and Gosney, and I mean, everyone's doing it. And I remember when it first came out. You had to have like a wood-fired oven to be able to make that kind of pizza. Now, for a couple $100, you can get an Uni portable oven or a rock box, and you can make great wood-fired pizza. It's not the only way to make
great pizza, but anybody can do it now. It's been democratized.
In 2 minutes, you can have a pizza, and it's as good as
Yeah.
anybody. We've done that before, but there's a lot of things to it. It does take practice. A lot of
It
people,
does.
they'll go to Trader Joe's and buy the dough, or go to their favorite pizza place, which will probably give it to them or sell it to them. That's fine, but making it yourself is really the fastest way. I think the best way. And Izzy's that was her state. She's got the patience to do that. I don't, but I mean. The problem with Izzy's doing it, if companies coming over, if you hired her, Peter, she could do maybe 3 pizzas for the whole day. Everything's got to be perfectly round, and it's like, ay. But they're great.
Yeah.
They turned out really good. So
I'm going to get to the front of the line if she's making it, because you
start
maybe a while before the next one comes out.
Yeah, go to Costco. You can eat 20 of them before you get to here. But let's talk about flour, because that's another thing too. We've talked to a lot of people, and there's King Arthur. There's all kinds of different ones out there, but 00 seems to be the flour of choice to most really, really good pizzerias and pizza makers I've talked to. And
I think that's a little bit a tricky tightrope to walk, because 00 flour, which is Italian style, super fine flour, has become popular because of the emergence of the wood fire pizza movement, which really is pretty recent. I mean, wood fire pizza's been around for forever, but as far as its popularity, it's what we call Napolitana or Neapolitan, true Neapolitan pizza.
Right.
Pizza from Naples, inspired by the way they do it in Naples. And there they do use 00 flour, and they bake pizzas in about 60 to 90 seconds in an 800-degree oven. They come out. That's not pizza Americano. That's not the way Americans grew up with pizza. We grew up with pizza that takes about 6 minutes to bake in an oven at about 600 degrees, and it's usually made with a different kind of flour, usually a high-protein flour. And so what we're seeing is now a proliferation of different styles of pizza.
Right.
New York style. There's, of course, the Chicago style. There's Detroit style, and then there's the Neapolitan style. At the competitions, when we were judging, there were at one time only a few categories. There was Neapolitan style, there was
traditional,
New York style, and then there was the everything else. Anything goes, the creative stuff. But now, because people were coming out with all these great versions of pizza, like the Detroit style pizza, which is becoming a rage, these days. But each of those do use a different kind of flour. So 00 flour is the right choice for pizzas that are going to be baked at high temperatures quickly, and it's just the nature of that flour. But if you're going to make a pizza that takes anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes to bake, I find that sort of the high-protein American flours are better, like bread flour, the one that you can just buy on a supermarket shelf, like King Arthur bread flour or General Mills, Great Harvest, or they call Harvest King flour. These are all about 12.5% protein compared to maybe 11% protein or 10.5% protein in the 00 flours. And so they bake differently. They allow you to put more water in the dough, which gives the dough a different kind of springing quality.
Right.
They have a little bit more chew. They're more al dente in that sense, and they're more closely. They relate more to the kind of pizzas we grew up with. Now, I mentioned Pizzeria Bianco as one of the great pizzerias in the country, and in fact, this year, Chris Bianco, the founder of Pizzeria, won the James Beard Award as the best restaurateur in America for a pizza restaurant.
Wow.
It's unheard of. He'd already won a James Beard Award in the past for just being the best chef in the Southwest. So he's one of those guys who's very influential in the pizza world. He makes a Neapolitan-style pizza. It's a wood-fired pizza that looks, from the outside, like he's making a pizza in the style of Naples. But unlike Naples, where the pizzas do bake in 60 to 90 seconds, his pizzas take about 4.5 minutes to bake. And he does it using American flour, high-protein flour.
Okay.
He likes now to use locally grown flour that he can source in the
easier, right?
Somewhere near Arizona, where he is. But he found that his style of pizza is a hybrid of the Neapolitan Naples style pizza and the American. I wouldn't call it New York style, but closer to the types of pizza we associate in America with pizza, which, as the category started to get redefined, started to be called Neapolitan pizza, the new version, the new American style of Naples-inspired pizza. And so what I'm saying is that there's a lot of different ways to do it. Flour is so important, obviously, but understanding fermentation of the flour
that's
is
the most
even more
important
important.
thing.
And
Right.
that's been the breakthrough.
Right.
Back in the last 10, 12 years, the breakthroughs that the bread makers, the great bread makers, have made in improving the quality of American bread has now carried over into the pizza community. And essentially, pizza dough is just another kind of bread dough.
Right.
So as the pizza makers got better at making the bread dough that became their crust, then the quality of the pizzas went up.
Right.
And we're lucky because we're living in a time now, I think, really the greatest pizzas that the world has ever seen are being made now, and it looks like there's no end in sight. There's still, every time you think that nobody can do it better, somebody comes up with a
in
pop
every
somewhere.
competition, it's like that. I mean, I remember one from China. It was from China,
Yeah.
and it was fantastic. I mean, it had rice cakes on there. Had shrimp paste thing. I mean, they had some really good stuff, which was, totally blew everybody away. There was some with caviar. I mean, people are trying everything. And
Gold flakes. Remember the one with
one
gold
with
flakes?
gold flakes was like I think it was like $115. But she geared for the Hollywood, celebrity in West Hollywood is where his pizza was. So the idea is to make money, but you want to wow people too. And before we move on, I want to let people know you're listening to the Let's Sign Out show right here on AM 1050. 102.3 FM and 106.5 FM, the stations that leave no listener behind. And with us, it's a great pleasure to have Peter Reinhardt, who is an American baker, educator, author, seminarian. He's everything. He's minister, whatever. I don't know what you do. A little bit of everything.
Former seminarian.
Former, okay.
My ministry now is teaching through bread.
Yeah, some people find God. He found bread. Go. I can find sushi. I could be that too. So.
Well, that's my point. Is that you can find your own sort of path through anything that you love can be a metaphor for you in your own personal journey.
Izzy, it's clothes and jewelry and shoes, and mine's food. So
that's right.
That's great. So okay, we talk pizzas. Let's talk about bread making because that's something that I have an electric bread maker, and they're fine. I remember when there was a big rage and everything, and they turned out good. I used to grind my own flour, and my kids grew up with it. Dense bread. It was healthy, a lot of fiber in it. But now it's taken a whole new approach to baking, and it's really an art. It's not just. You could follow the recipe, but it still may not turn out. So in terms of hints, is there anything what would you recommend for someone who really wants to concentrate on making bread and do the best?
Well, yeah, bread making it's an art and a craft, and there's a lot of people who are getting deep into bread are also getting excited about the science of it because we talked about fermentation, and really that's fermentation is you don't have to be a scientist to be great at fermenting things, but it opens up the realm of food science to us in a way that kind of again gives you another level of meaning and understanding. Because what you're really doing is you're transforming ingredients from one thing into something else. So I think that just to make it simple, we'll say that bread starts out as wheat growing in the ground, and the seeds of that grass that's called wheat are gathered, and they're ground into flour like you did. And so when you ground those seeds into flour, you destroyed the life-giving properties of those seeds. You can't take that flour and plant it in the ground and get more wheat. You'd have to hold some seeds back and plant it if you want to get wheat. So you're taking destroyed wheat, pulverized wheat, and you're putting it in a bowl. You're adding water, some salt, and then this sort of the secret ingredient, which is leaven, yeast. And when you add leaven, which is the root word for to enliven, you actually bring that wheat back to life. You turn the wheat and transform this lifeless flour into dough, and this dough comes to life because the yeast wakes up and it kind of infuses that dough with living organisms, and those organisms ferment. They begin to seek out food, and as a result of eating sugars, the yeast in the flour begins to create carbon dioxide, alcohol, acids, all sorts of things to create flavor. And so suddenly this dough, which essentially is still unedible because it's not digestible when it's just raw bread dough, but the dough starts to develop flavor and character, and it grows, and it expands because it's trapping the carbon dioxide in this fermentation process, and eventually you can shape it and form it, and then you take it, this living dough, this thing that's alive, and you take it to the hot oven, and you put it in the oven, and here's where another transformation takes place. You transform living wheat into dead wheat back to life as living dough, then living dough into the oven, where as soon as the dough gets to be about 138 degrees Fahrenheit, you've destroyed the life. The yeast can't tolerate the temperatures above 138, and it dies. But by the time the yeast dies, it's fulfilled its purpose. Its purpose was to raise the dough so that it can become bread. And by the time that the dough cooks to about 190 to 200 degrees, it's not dough anymore. It goes in as dough, but it comes out the oven as bread. And this bread is a totally different creature than how it started. So I think of bread as a series of transformations from wheat to dough, from dough to bread. And in the end, that bread is what people get so excited about. It's transformed wheat. And that's kind of the secret. So you don't have to, understand all the science that's going in, but as the baker, your job is to shepherd the ingredients through the fermentation process, the transformational process, so that it can become, and in a sense, fulfill its own destiny, which is to become bread. And your job is to just create the conditions and understand what's the right temperature, what's the ideal temperature for fermenting the dough so it doesn't over ferment or that it doesn't under ferment. When's the right time to take it to the oven where this dough can be turned into bread? All those are choices that the baker makes, but you're not in that dough, hammering away, releasing the acids and creating the carbon dioxide. The dough is doing its own work. It's growing, and your job is to just provide the environment in which the perfect growth can take place.
Right, and also, the hydration. People are fermenting it 3-4 days. We hear some of them, and they take so much pride in that.
Yes.
So it's a learning process. Now, in all your books, would you recommend one that starts for a beginner like us?
I think that the book that's been the most successful for me, because it works for both beginners and experienced bakers, is one called The Bread Baker's Apprentice. And that's the one that I wrote that one right before I got into the pizza thing. In fact, it was the last book I wrote before I wrote my American Pie pizza book. And that book ended up winning both the James Beard Award and also about 2 other international awards. In fact, it just swept the awards for Best Book of the Year.
Oh, wow.
Because somehow, but that was about my 5th or 6th book, I had somehow put together the elements. It came together, nicely to tell the story of bread and how to make bread in a way that anybody can understand. Even, to talk about some of this metaphoric thing that we were just talking about, bringing it to life and all of this stuff. All of that's in there, and it seemed to touch a nerve.
Exactly.
And so even now, that book came out over 20 years ago. I think it came out in 2001. So it's been out for 21 years, and it still outsells all my other books put together.
Wow.
So it's the book that basically pays our bills.
That's
because
fantastic.
It's still selling 20-some years later.
That's great.
And it's the one that if anyone says, if I could have just one of your books, which is the one to have, that's the one I would say to get, because it's kind of like the complete bread course and more.
Understandable.
And
now,
so I would say that one.
Okay, now I'm sorry. In 2007, your book, it's called Peter Reinhardt's Whole Grain Breads. You did an innovative technique that employed a soaker and a pre-ferment, which in its own way revolutionized the whole traditional method that usually required 20 minutes of hand kneading for whole wheat bread. So let's talk about that, because that's really interesting.
Yeah, well, of course, I think that whole grain breads, which are fortunately more and more people are eating whole grain breads because they are better for us. The fiber that is retained in that flour, when you milled your own flour out and you kept the bran and the germ that was in those wheat berries, that's the good stuff. That's the part that's good for you.
Fiber and
The
yep.
white flour, the part that's where all the starches are, that's where the flavor lies, but it's not where the nutrition lies.
Right.
And so you can make, with white flour, you can make delicious, tasty bread. But basically, what you're doing is you're working with starches and sugars. And by sugars, I mean that the starch itself is a sugar.
Right.
So white flour is essentially powdered sugar in potential, and that during the fermentation process, the sweetness of those starches, that the sugars that are in the starches, comes out, and that's why French bread, for instance, or white bread is so delicious.
Mm-hmm.
But when when you're dealing with these other facets, which are the healthier parts, it's trickier. And so because they work against the flavor, there's a little bitterness in them. The fiber of the bran can sometimes cut the gluten that's in the dough, so the dough doesn't rise as high. So there's all sorts of challenges to make a great whole grain bread. But of course, the bakers have risen to that challenge. The good bakers are making killer whole grain breads, and whether they make it 100% whole grain or whether they just put some whole grain into their white breads, it's all good because they're getting better and better at doing that.
Right. So you're like the Edison of breads.
Well, it's not like I invented any of this stuff. I'm almost more the reporter on all this because, there's so many great bakers now that are each of them making their own breakthroughs. And the good thing about both the bread and the pizza community is that the people in it are very generous about sharing their knowledge.
Exactly.
It's like we all feel that nobody has a monopoly. There's always going to be a market for good bread or good pizza. So, why have all these secret
Well, it's
techniques nobody
passion.
else
These
can
are the
know?
most passionate people I've ever met in the food business. I mean, I've been to all the food shows that, mankind knows, but nothing like the pizza people and baking people. They really care. They're so passionate. When they talk, their pride. You can see it just twinkle in their eyes and everything. And now it looks like the new trend now is low carb. Keto, low carb, sugar free, all that stuff for diabetics, for heart, for people with celiac and everything.
Yeah.
Now you help a woman co-write a book, and let's talk about that because I just ordered that, by the way. So I want to have you on again talking about that.
Yeah.
But it's basically a book on low carb, on grain-free. Gluten-free, and
It's called The Joy of Gluten-Free, Sugar-Free Baking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's developed specifically for people that are dealing with either diabetes or other blood sugar issues, like hypoglycemia and things like that, and also with gluten sensitivities, which is a real thing. I mean, there's some people that blame gluten for their health problems, and it may not be the gluten, but there are a lot of people who really do have, intolerance for gluten, and could be life and death for people with celiac disease and things like that to eat gluten. And I can tell you that when the people who I know who have celiac disease had to give up bread, I mean, that was much harder for them to give up bread than it is for somebody to give up meat or or caviar or anything, all the good stuff, because bread is just, people love their bread. And so for many years there was sort of mediocre gluten-free bread. It was because the market wasn't big enough to drive innovation. But over time more and more people began supporting the gluten-free foods business, and it's a huge industry now. And the quality of the products got better and better. So, but there was still, most of the gluten-free breads were still made with things like rice flour, tapioca starch.
Which, if you're diabetic,
starch,
it's all carbs.
Which are, exactly, that's high starch. We're talking about starch again, which again translates to sugar.
Right.
So, the purpose of this book was to come out with some breads. We wrote this before the keto thing took off. Even the term keto was still pretty much underground.
Right.
But had I known that keto was going to be as big as it was, we could have easily called it, the joy of gluten-free,
That's
sugar-free,
your next book,
keto-friendly breads, because this book is keto. All these recipes are totally keto-friendly, because they're low in starches, low in sugars, and I think the goal was that the portion of every product that's in the book would have less than 5 grams of net carbs.
Wow, that's fantastic.
So we work a lot with almond flour, nut flours in general, seed flours, and instead of sugars, if a recipe would traditionally call for sugar, we might use something like stevia or you can even use Splenda, which I don't like so much because it's not as natural a product as say stevia,
Right.
but it works. It's a great sugar substitute.
Right.
And then other people are using monk fruit and other kinds of sugar
Erythritol
replacers
and you're right.
that don't spike your blood sugar.
Right.
So, but we needed to, again, the idea was let's come up with something that's not only is healthful, but also tastes good. And that's what the nut flours make all the difference. I mean,
I know.
it's more expensive than wheat flour. Almond flour is pretty pricey,
Yeah.
but it really tastes great. When you make a muffin or when you make even a loaf of bread using almond flour.
And we have, and now there's like Bisquick. There's one that is for low carb. It's really, really good. But I'm telling you, this could be your new book. I'm just giving you. I want a royalty on it. No royalty. Just give me a book to look at. But I'm telling you,
I'll use you as our field rep, our tester.
Oh, yeah.
There, testing out the recipes.
yeah, Izzy will she'll make one bread a month. That'll be good. So
That'll be great.
I want to talk real quick. Again, we're talking to Peter Reinhardt, who's a internationally known, well-respected educator, baking expert, and just a good guy. And he really wants to turn people on, to bread making and making it good. And he's just one of the leaders in the whole revolution that's going on in terms of really pushing bread, baking, pizza dough, all that stuff to a whole new level. It's not just food, cram your face and leave. They really care about what's going on. And now you have something called artisanbakingcenter.com, and you have something called the link to Pizza Quest Pizza Class. You do pizza classes online. Let's talk about that a little bit.
This is like so new. It just launched yesterday. I mean, it just came out yesterday.
Okay.
A video that we made this summer at the Artisan Baking Center in Petaluma, California. I was teaching a pizza class. Let me backtrack a little bit. About 10 years ago, after I wrote American Pie, My Search for the Perfect Pizza, I hooked up with a couple of television producers from Los Angeles who wanted to turn that book into like a PBS show, like the Search for the Perfect Pizza.
Right.
And they coined the term Pizza Quest. And so we formed a little company, and we started we filmed what we had hoped would be a series that would run, on PBS. The problem was this was around 2009. It was really hard to get funding and underwriting to get a PBS series on the air.
Oh, yeah.
So we turned it into a web series. We got a website we created, and we edited our footage into short, like 5-minute segments. And for the last 10, 12 years, we've been running PizzaQuest.com. So if anyone wants to just check out some of the cool work that we've done there, just go to www.pizzaquest.com, and you'll see some of the videos. But that led then during the pandemic, when all the pizza, restaurants were closing down, or and travel was impossible. We couldn't go out and film anymore, and so but then miraculously, Zoom came along, and so we came up with the idea that we could. I could keep creating new content for the website by interviewing people, just like you're interviewing me. We would do these Zoom interviews, and we created a Zoom-style video podcast that then now also exists as an audio podcast. And if people want to hear some of these interviews with I would call the superstars of the pizza world, you can just go to, again, PizzaQuest.com and see the videos of them, but also just on any podcast carrier, just go to Pizza Quest with Peter Reinhardt, and you can hear these same interviews. And as a result, we started to accumulate tons of great content, of all these guests would share, some of their own passion for what they're doing, their story, but also give little demonstrations. And before we knew it, we had like this had amassed some great content, and so we put that into a book that just came out last year. Actually, it came out only about 4 months ago, called Pizza Quest. And so the book is named after the series, but it's Pizza Quest, and the subtitle is My Never-Ending Search for the Perfect Pizza Continues. And in it, we feature 30 of the top pizza makers in America, each of them sort of giving us one or two of their pizzas that we could showcase in the book. And they didn't give me their recipes. They gave me their idea, the idea for their pizza, a photo of it. It's one that they served in their restaurants, and then I would create, using my knowledge as a dough person and as an author, I would create a homemaker's version, what we call a tribute pizza, to the pizzas of these that were created by these great pizza masters. And so suddenly we had all these, in the book there's like 35 great pizzas from 30 different contributors and wonderful photos. And so I was doing a class based on the book in Petaluma, and we got a video crew together, and we actually created a Pizza Quest class. So that just came out yesterday, and I think, and the way you get to it, I don't own it or anything. I'm just the host of this. I'm the teacher in the class. But if anybody's interested in getting this course, it features 4 of the pizzas from the book, but also 3 or 4 different ways of making pizza dough, our sauce recipe. There's all sorts of content in there.
Right.
And I believe for now, this weekend, there's a coupon code if you go to it, and you get 35% off. So I think the course sells for like $99, but if you buy it now, it's like $67. But you can stream it forever, and it's really cool. I mean, I'm excited about it. I have no idea if anybody will embrace it, but we think that they will. If anyone has ever done classes with Craftsy, I've done courses for the Craftsy program. It's similar to a Craftsy kind of course, and you just have to go to artisanbakingcenter.com. One word, artisanbakingcenter.com, and then when you get there, look for the video courses. They're releasing a few courses by other great bakers as well. But mine's the pizza course, and it's called Pizza Quest.
And the code word is launch, LAUNCH 35. So
that's right. If you do it by Monday, and you go and you put in the coupon launch, and I think it's all capital letters.
Yeah.
35. Then you get this $35 discount. So
wow, that sounds great.
A pretty good deal.
I'm
trying to convince the guys who created it, and I think they're going to do it to extend that discount period for a couple more weeks. Because,
let people know about it, right?
Yeah, but for now, use the code launch35.
Okay, cool. Peter, I really, really appreciate you coming on. I know it's been kind of a last-minute thing, and you're a joy to talk to. Your incredible amount of knowledge. I see Izzy's mind going like, ooh, I can't wait to make pizza. Her goal now is to make 2 a night. I want to try
one of these pizzas now. I feel like I got to get out there.
Oh, they're excellent. I'm telling you, it's excellent. So, when you're in Southern...
Well, maybe we can all connect at Pizza Expo again.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's the gathering place where what I call the tribe or community of pizza freaks all gather.
Exactly.
10,000 people show up at the convention in Vegas. There's one coming up for people who are on the East Coast or can get to it in Atlantic City in October, a smaller version of it. I think it's called the Pizza and Artisan Baking Expo East or Northeast or something.
Yeah.
And but this is where we all get together, and
good place.
People love to get together and compare notes.
Real quick, I got to go. Real quick, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way?